Strategies that smart farms use to weather bad ag economies. That's the subject of this episode of The Business of Agriculture. Hey, Damian Mason here with a question before we hop into this episode of The Business of Agriculture. If you farm for a living, you employ a lot of amazing technology, from your inputs that you put into the soil to the tractor that you sit in, your combine, and the amazing data that it harvests. But has your soil analytics kept up technologically with everything else in your farming operation? I would venture to say that no, it is not. Sure, you check for your nitrogen, your phosphorus, or potassium, your micronutrients as well, but what about disease pressure? Do you know what diseases and what pests you're going to face next year? No, you don't, but you can now figure that out with pattern.ag's predictive analytics. Think about it. They can tell you now with testing what the likelihood of facing nasty diseases, things like cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome, what the likelihood of you having this in your field. Then you know how to prepare, how to treat, and where to invest your money. It's using technology to make you bigger yields and therefore make you bigger money. Go to www.pattern.ag to learn more. They are pioneering the way in predictive agronomy. Hey there, welcome to another fantastic episode of The Business of Agriculture. I've got a great one for you today because I got a great guest. His name is Chris Barron with AgView Solutions. He has a podcast called AgView Pitch. I've been on it. He's been on my show multiple times. He's been a client. In fact, I'm going to be speaking at his executive summit that he has for business-minded farming operations. It's going to be in Florida, January 23rd is when I'm going to be on stage. It's a great event. And also, Mr. Barron is a farmer himself, and he runs professional networking groups, or not professional peer groups, I should say, within agriculture, where maybe 10 farms, 5 farms, can't remember what it is, then get together and actually share data, share information, and hold each other accountable. So he's got a lot of really good stuff going on. So he works with some of the brightest and best farming operations in North America, and he helps them survive. He helps them strategize. It's a George W. Bush word. Strategize is not really a word. He helps them strategize on how to be successful. You know, we talk about occupying the future. We're talking about being here, passing on that legacy. And the first thing you got to do is treat your farming operation as a business. So I've been fielding a lot of questions, Chris, holiday time. Hey, Damian, you're an ag guy. I just read that ag economy is really bad. What's going on? I had somebody say, it's because of the drought. And I said, no, it's because of overproduction of commodities. Well, I thought we were in a drought. I'm like, yeah, we're so damn good at making commodities. Even in a drought, we can make too many of them. So that's really the big picture. So strategies smart farms to deploy to weather bad ag economies. You've been around a couple of bad ag economies. You're no spring chicken. This isn't that bad. Here we are wrapping up 2024. It's the first downturn year after 3 record income years. It's the concern about what might happen, because usually ag downturns last 5, 3, 7 years.
Yes. A lot of times it's 4 to 7 years. If you go back and look, I've been through personally myself economically as a producer and also as a consultant working with producers on financials. I've seen this movie. I'm going into the 4th repeat of this movie. All the sequels are pretty similar. They're not usually, or at least have not been as deep as the very first one I was in as a kid, you know, in the 80s or whatever. You know, I was a kid then, and but I do remember that distinctly.
Well, it doesn't mean you didn't go through it. I can tell you that when we say a downturn might last 4 to 7 years, Chris, 81, literally the shit hit the fan, and it didn't get better until maybe late 90s. I mean, that was essentially a 15 to 20 year bad.
Yeah, but what it did was it created a lot of consolidation, and it created some opportunities for entry level operations that were able to get in and able to grow right out of the chute. So I kind of changed the trajectory of some things too, because we have some operations that started in 83, let's say 83, 84, and are massively successful today because they started in that difficult environment. It's kind of like if you go to Vegas and you win money the first day you're there, you're screwed because you're going to give it all away the rest of the time. And if you show up and, you know, you have a struggle, and I always say, you know, to me, these difficult times, and you can quantify it as difficult to whatever degree you want.
Yeah.
but challenging times always make us better. We do not get better with, $8 corn and, $14 soybeans and high dollar wheat and cotton and all this stuff. We don't get better with high prices. We get better with low prices because that forces us to do what we should be doing and be a business first and just happen to farm. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's a philosophical adjustment that in every single one of these downturns, there's a psychological adjustment and behavioral changes that occur. And that's why I think the industry, each time we go through one of these troughs, handles it better each time. And I think that's the main reason, is because we learn and we change and we improve. And if we don't, we're out of the picture anyway. So we're out of it. I think the ones that are in it now, there's going to be people that are going to fail, but I think the ones that are in it now are just going to have to recalibrate for a while, like we do in every single downturn. Mm-hmm. Control the controllables, manage your opportunities and be smart about capital expenditures. That's the big thing. I think a lot of times people, my dad told me one time, if you're digging a hole and you can't get out of it, stop freaking digging first of all. And, and that's what I think. And I get teased about this sometimes from some clients, but it's like, go on a capital freeze for a year. I bet you that if you don't buy anything for a year, you'll still be in business next year. And so just stop freaking spending for a year and fix some things, update some things, spend some time focusing on what you can control, and then launch back into it again. And there's just sometimes we have to reset. I mean, sometimes the computer does not work quite right. Sometimes you have to do a hard reset. And I think that's different in business.
All right. Well, first off, I've had a couple of people more of the less business-minded agricultural people, and there are those. They don't tend to tune into this show because we talk about business, money, finance, and business aspects of it. But you and I both know there's this notorious group within production agriculture in America. It's the co-op crowd. It's the go to the coffee shop in their bib overalls crowd. And it's the bitch about the neighbors crowd. It's the resentful crowd, etc. They're the same ones when I say things really aren't that bad. Well, you don't know because you're not a real farmer. I'm like, okay, again, we just came off of three of the record, the three best years North American agriculture has had since there's been a thing called North American agriculture. 1 year downturn does not a crisis make. So, and especially putting in context, I lived through the 80s. I was out there feeding those calves when I was 12 years old, starting in 1981, when we were obligating 18% interest. So I can put that in perspective. Ag is an industry that runs for the exit screaming fire quicker than any other industry. I swear to God, Chris. I mean, it's that farmer mentality. Oh God, we're all going to die. And it becomes a little bit Chicken Little. So, I mean, I'm just going to start off before I anything. Bad downturn? Sure. Yeah. Is it a downturn? Yes. Is it terrible? I don't think so. So, I mean, can we start by putting things in perspective and then we'll go through your strategies? Because you said your first one was capital freeze for 1 year. It's striking that's what you have to tell people. Because again, if we were in year 6 of this, a capital freeze for 1 year wouldn't fix it.
It wouldn't. There's, with the capital side of it though, there's needs, wants, and wishes, and I think sometimes those categories get confused. And the other side of what's happening right now too on the capital side of things is, and we can get to this in a minute, but the lenders are going to have more scrutiny in a downturn, which they should have that same scrutiny when things are going really good. Right. But banks get lazy too, just like farmers do. They get lazy on the financials because they feel comfortable, and the regulators don't pull on that stuff as much.
Yeah, the tide's up, everything's good.
Yep.
Why crunch numbers?
Right. And so now what we have to do is, when I say capital freeze, I mean that comes with a bunch of other things, right? It's like analyzing your debt service number and saying, okay, what's my cash flow requirement? Okay, and it doesn't have to be complicated either. It can be fairly simple. It's like, how much revenue can I legitimately generate this year with average yields or the production on the beef or the dairy herd, whatever it is what is my production realistically going to give me in the upcoming year? Mm-hmm. Okay. Run those numbers, but what we're seeing that has happened in a lot of cases, even a lot of these operations that are very solid is when we make more money, what do? We spend more. And so that's what's happened in those 3 good years you're talking about. And even to the point where, I would argue, we're actually in our kind of getting into our second year of what I would call a downturn because of inflation. It increased the cost of production. We still had good revenue, but our cost of production continued higher, even, because we've come through a pretty intensive inflationary time frame.
Right.
But when we do this cash flow, I think it's really important, though, that we say, okay, what is our debt service? And take those debt numbers, whether it's on land, machinery, equipment, your short-term, intermediate, and long-term debts, and put those all in one category and look at that number and say, okay, this is my debt service number. Subtract that from your total expenses, equal that out with your income. And that's where we get in trouble, because I think a lot of times people do the cash flow and they don't have their debt service in there. The other issue is a lot of times growers are notorious for, you talked about the co-op, you talked about, I call it third party loans. So it's the seed company, it's all of these other, the chem, it's the maybe the machinery company that will loan you money at a quote unquote lower interest rate. Now all of a sudden you have your line of credit with the bank, but you have these other third party loans too. Those all have to be consolidated in front of your face and not separated on separate sheets of paper in the desk or on the table or whatever. You need to put that stuff in front of you and say, this is what I legitimately have on my line of credit, short term. This is legitimately what I have in my intermediate debt, midterm, and this is what I have long term. But then consolidate those all together and say, can I cover this debt service? Because that's exactly what the bank's looking at. And again, we're business people. We just happen to farm. And so we have to do those things. All
right. So running through, we said we're going to talk about strategies for down economies, bad ag economies. You talked about, okay, first off, you're not going to go out of business by freezing capital for 1 year. By the way, is that where these machinery companies obviously are predicting 30% less machinery sales in 25, and it's probably already happened in 2024. That's the kind of stuff you're talking about, right? Big steel or buildings or farm ground.
Yeah, and even right now, I mean, there's really good deals on used equipment right now that's really cheap, but it's like you maybe would tell your spouse, just because everything's on sale at Target doesn't mean you buy everything either. I mean, sale doesn't necessarily correlate to a need. And I still think, when we do a lot of fleet management with people, machinery and equipment's the second largest line item expense. If it's the second largest line item expense, and why do we spend so much time bugging the chemical guy to try to save 3 cents a bushel on corn or whatever? We're saving $5 an acre. Who gives a crap? Because we're probably spending $30 an acre by not managing the machinery and equipment fleet better, or not having conversations with the landowners on the cash rent and having a better dialogue there and reasons, examples, and details as to why the rent should be where it is. And I will pay you more when it's good. And I'm going to be transparent with you and start working on those relationships. But we spend so much time, and I'm not picking on every farmer, and I don't want hate mail. I get enough of that as it is, but we spend too much time, I think, working on some of the little things, the chemistry and the seed and some of those things, and it ends up being not that big a deal. The big line items are land and machinery. Those are the two largest line items that we need to spend probably the most time on.
I want to get into how you do that. And before I do, we're looking into a new year here in 2025. The new year brings hope for improved outcomes on your farming operation. One way to achieve that is through the high-tech plant nutrition provided by Redox Bio-Nutrients. Redox is a family-owned company in business since 1994. Redox provides superior nutrition with biostimulants, focusing on maintaining your plant charge balance. All nutrients have a positive or a negative charge. Maintaining charge balance allows plants to focus on yield and quality with improved performance come harvest time. Once you find out more, you can go to redoxgrows.com. Do that. You'll get detailed product information and the Redox Grows podcast, including episodes with me on it. Yes, that's right. I've been a guest on the Redox Grows podcast. Go check it out. That's redoxgrows.com. By the way, if your company wants to reach more consumers in the ag space in 2025, I do have an opening for an advertiser. So get a hold of me. That's right. You could be being talked about right here, or you could be even at the front end, like my friends pattern.ag used to be. Yeah, or you know what? I want to hear from you. So call me up, give me a shout, send me an email. You could be a sponsor of the Business of Agriculture. Machinery, you just said something really interesting. The average farm person doesn't look at that, and they instead look at, oh, well, we need to go and beat up our suppliers. And like you said, beat them up so you're getting a couple bucks an acre. But machinery extrapolated over the operation is a big expense. And as you said, yeah, there's some deals for cheap machinery, but you know, I read a lot of personal finance books, and one of them talks a lot about that. The person that's perpetually broke always has this shiny object they went and bought, but it's always the same story. Yeah, but I got a great deal on this. Well, you're broke. I got a great deal on this. No, spending more, but saying that you got a good deal on it doesn't mean you're going to get out of brokenness. There's a lot of machinery that's sitting on the farms in America, and I could argue that many farms are over-equipped because farmers like machinery. Let's go to Louisville, North American Farm Machinery Show. I mean, they love looking at this stuff. It seems to me a lot of operations could pare back on machinery, and all of a sudden that a couple $100,000, you know, that goes from being in the red to being in the black. Am I wrong?
No, our most profitable operations that we see correlate directly with kind of what you're saying, and from the standpoint of their machinery and equipment cost on a per bushel basis, on a per ton basis, whatever it is that they're growing per pound. When we look at that machinery and equipment cost on a per unit of production basis, which is how you have to do it. I mean, a lot of people look at per acre because that's how we've always done it, but just because that's how we've always done it doesn't mean that's how we should. Mm-hmm. We should be looking at production, correlating that number to production and saying, you know, where am I at? And so when we look at a producer, just use corn as an example specifically, you know, if we look at a corn producer and he or she is spending 86 cents a bushel for machinery and equipment, and the neighbor's spending 63 cents a bushel for machinery and equipment, who's going to stay in business in a downturn?
Yeah.
You know, all of a sudden that cost of production has a direct correlation to profitability. But I think what happens a lot of times is those measurements are not being completed, or they're not being done because, like you said, it's more fun to be in the shop. And I think as farmers, we're all guilty. I would much rather do the $30 an hour jobs than the $500 an hour jobs on the farm because they're more fun. However, the money is made when you're doing the $500 an hour jobs in the office, you know, working on your marketing, working on your relationships with landowners and those types of things, and your fleet management.
You've said that before, by the way, that we focus on the $30 an hour job, wrenching on stuff, or driving a piece of equipment, as opposed to sitting at your desk and cranking out the spreadsheets and then looking at your P&L statements. You talked about then a strategy of land management. Now, I host the Halderman Real Estate and Farm Management quarterly webinar. I keep very much in touch with what's going on with land values and cash rents. They're due to stay even the next year. And if, as a landowner, if you one of your strategies was maybe you should meet with your landowner and say, hey, I'd like to look at bringing my cost down. I think you run the risk of absolutely getting replaced as a tenant if that's the case, because there's still a lot of pressure to grow acres among these operations. So you said maybe you should go and have a conversation with your landlord. I don't disagree, but I think there's a risk of I think you get told no, rent's the same, and you say, well, I don't want to pay it. Then I think you get replaced. I think that's a real risk. So I don't know if I would look at that as a strategy, because I think there's still a lot of pressure on these acres. Am I wrong?
Well, I would argue with that to a degree, because I think it's about being transparent all the time. So I'm not talking about being transparent when the shit's hitting the fan, excuse my French, but I don't think that's when when the conversation begins and ends, I think the conversation begins and lasts throughout the up and downs. And I think transparency is the key. I mean, the farmers listening to this, the farmers that are listening to this, and the landowners listening to this, some people do not want transparency, including some of the farmers. Sometimes you'd rather be happy than informed, but on the same token, I think being informed in the long haul and being able to and willing to share in that in terms of, I mean, some of the best leases we see a lot of crop share out there. I mean, you don't hear about the crop share, but we still have a lot of clients that have 50/50s, 60/40s, different types of crop share because there's trust with the tenant and the owner. So I think that has a lot to do with it, though, is the relationship that you build. And if you think about, if you're a landowner that has 5 different farmers, the ones you like the most or the ones you feel the most comfortable with are the ones you talk to the most, because you have a relationship and you have trust, and trust is the cornerstone and the backbone of making that work. And people work with people. And then the other thing I always tell farmers, and I tell people who are in sales this all the time, is there are decision makers and there are influencers when you're trying to sell something, or and which is what you're doing when you're renting the ground. You're trying to sell yourself. And when you do that, you have to understand who the decision maker is, first of all, but secondly, who is in the background is the influencer. Is there a spouse there that's like, you shouldn't be doing that, or you should be doing that, and are you having conversations with the influencer that's going to actually probably sway the decision one way or the other? But I don't know. I've seen some pretty good luck, and there are going to be the landowners that really don't care. That's called market value. They're going to say the neighbor down the road is going to pay that. That's a decision that the producer has to make. And then the producer also has to then do, the margin contribution calculation and say, okay, well, if I did give that up, now I can't spread my fixed costs out over as much acres. And then I think that's where that margin contribution comes in, and you decide either I keep it or I let it go. But a lot of these land deals anymore, farmers are picking up 1,000 acres at a time. It's not an 80 or a 160. It's more like, 500 here and 1,000 there. So big decisions.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, I want to hear more about the strategies the smart farmers are using to weather bad ag economies, and we're going to get to that. Before I do, this is the final commercial for 2024 for Truterra. Truterra is focused on supporting farmers at every stage of the sustainability journey to help plan, make, and maintain regenerative management practices to improve your agronomic, economic, and environmental sustainability of your farming operation for the long term. We're talking right now about strategies that smart farmers use to weather bad ag economies. One of them would be, in my opinion, looking at a sustainability program. What if you can get paid $30 an acre to implement some changes, strip till, cover crops, some things that are actually going to improve your farming operation anyhow, and you can get paid for it when you have down economies? You should always look at diversification of revenue. Truterra can help. Go to truterraag.com/enroll, truterraag.com/enroll. And as I already said, I'm not against hoarding it out here. That's the last spot for Truterra because they don't need ag outreach anymore. They told me, they said, we've got enough ag outreach. They said in 2025, we're not going to sponsor you. So if you have a company that wants to be a sponsor of the Business of Agriculture, you could have been right there. All right, full disclosure. What about loans? When you talk about debt management, there was 2% money, 3% money, 4% money. Now it's like 7% money. If I've got borrowed money at current rates, hell, I just got something from Farm Credit telling me that if I used a line of credit from them, it'd be like 8% money. I'm not sure that I can make 8% money work. So am I hurting myself if I just borrow new money right now?
I think it depends on the rate of return. I mean, all those things got to be looked at specifically. But I mean, to me, I would say that, the days of 2, 3, 4% interest are probably long gone for quite a while, unless something majorly happens in the economic environment from a macro perspective. And so I think we have to recalibrate our decision making at 8% interest or 7% interest and say, okay, any decision that I make, is it feasible with that level of interest rate, whether it's short-term, long-term, intermediate? But I also think, back to short-term money, you look at lines of credit, we see one of the big things, that a lot of producers could do is we have a tendency to sit on inventory way too long. And you always hear marketers talk about capturing carry, or the pundits talking about, try to capture that carry when it's there. The carry, in my opinion, never gets to be enough hardly if you're borrowing money, because, what you're betting on is the come. You're betting on the price to go up. And a lot of times what happens is you have the risk of it, because it can go either way, right? So it can go down too. And so there is a cost of carry, and we have a cost calculator that we use with our clients all the time to say, are you justified in sitting on this inventory when you're spending? And we break it down to cost per day.
And inventory, you're not talking about supplies, you're talking about grain.
I'm talking about, grain or cotton, or I don't care, whatever you
grain, cotton, cattle, I guess, but
yeah. And grain's the worst because you can hang on to it too long. Yeah. And so, there's a cost to sitting on that. And, I'll talk to a producer and he'll be like, well, I got $1 million on line of credit. And well, how much inventory do you have? Well, I got, 200,000 bushel in the bin, but I'm waiting for, 25 cents increase here yet. Yeah. Or whatever. Well, okay, let's do the math on that. At your 8% interest on your line of credit, it's costing you $322 a day. Or whatever the number is, and when people start thinking about it in cost per day, if they had to write a check out every day for that amount, or every month for $8,700 a month, they would start thinking differently about it. And so I feel like our role a lot of times is to be the perspective and say, let's think about this in some different ways, to motivate you to, to maybe not sit on that inventory as long as I think we do. And I think, sometimes too, I've had a lot of younger producers call me in the last year that are experiencing losses for the first time. And it's shocking to them that, they've gone through, to your point, 4 years of really good times of making money. And now all of a sudden there's a loss. What am I going to do? Well, we're going to average the last 5 years, and we're going to look at how much money we made in the last 5 years. And hopefully you didn't spend everything you made in the last 4 years, so that we can weather the storm and catch it on the other side again. And I think that's really the key is, don't get all depressed because we had a crappy year. Feel blessed that we had a few good years, and manage that working capital. It's back to, and I brought up, capital freeze, but that's just one piece of a big equation.
All right, before we get into managing working capital, I want to wrap up on inventory management of grain. You think that there's a lot of producers that they know they've got a bin out there and it's got grain in it, and they look at that as an asset, but it's also going to be a liability because it's costing them something to store it, because the bin is not free. But also, if they're obligating, like you said, 8% money or 7% operating loan on the one hand, and this is over here, well, yeah, it's going to go up in value. Well, maybe, but also if it has to go up, like to your point, that grain needs to go up by 40 cents to offset what you're paying each day over here. Maybe you should just unload it. So you say there's
at least be cognizant of what it's costing you to carry it. And then there's also opportunity costs for those who aren't borrowing money. You could go to Vanguard and put it in a Vanguard money market, and you can take it in and out the same darn day.
For 4.6% on.
Well, yeah, it was to almost 5.5% at one point. So, I mean,
yeah. Is your grain going up? Is your grain going up at 4.6%?
Who knows? Nobody knows.
Well, I mean, that's the question you're asking, right?
Right.
I mean, you're so just by what you're saying there is opportunity cost. Am I talking about a $4 bushel? Right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the scenario, I guess. Not sure the question's after that.
All right. So the point is, it does need to go up. It does need to go up 20 cents compared to what you could put it in, to get a 5% return.
Well, that's just it. I mean, and the problem is, a lot of times I think we have a tendency to have a price target instead of a margin target. Nobody knows where the price is going out. You can be the best broker in the world, and you don't know any more than you can send Damian the hate mail to here. But you can be the best broker in the world, or you can be the farmer that doesn't know anything, or a monkey for that matter, and throw darts at a wall and probably be just as accurate on on where the price is going, because there's so many variables in today's world, and we're in a world economy, and there's so many things that can change it up and down instantaneously. And so if producers have a margin target, if they know their cost of production and they feel like they're confident in that number, then set a margin target and say, okay, what am I willing to take? And there's years like possibly this next year that you're going to take a loss, but how much of a loss are you willing to take?
Yeah.
I mean, are you willing to sell? And I'm not saying you sell at a loss, but some years we have to minimize the losses and not make money, but we got to minimize the downside. And there's lots of tools to use too. I mean, that's kind of what those brokers are for, but I still think you need to really know your cost of production first and have it dialed in accurately. There's a difference between knowing your cost of production and having it accurate. And then once that's dialed in, then set a target, margin target, not a price target.
Got it. All right. Managing working capital. This is a topic that we cover a lot, and I hear a lot in agriculture. And you said the first thing is just stop spending. You know, you can probably hold off on some big spends. Okay. I think that most ag operators get that. You know, that's why we see less John Deeres being sold and whatever. But managing working capital always sounds intimidating. What's that mean? What's my working capital and how do I manage it?
Well, first of all, it's understanding how to calculate it and what it is. It's your current assets minus your current liabilities, and it's that dollar amount. And there's 1,000 different ways to look at it in terms of ratios and dollars per acre and all kinds of different ways depending on what your production is. But I think the biggest thing is not to worry about what everybody else is doing. And I struggle a lot of times with benchmarking, and banks have to do it a lot too, or they choose to do it rightfully so because they want to see where their clientele are at in terms of, you know, a solid cash flow and a solid working capital position versus, you know, our lowest one and our highest one, and then grading the people in between. I get that. The problem is, you know, we've got operations that don't have hardly any working capital that are cash flowing just fine because of how they operate and what their business model is. We've got some that have a ton of working capital that are probably going to burn through it in the next 2 years because they're not able to cash flow.
So they just start borrowing against assets.
Well, the biggest thing that affects it is what I brought up earlier in the conversation is not having a good handle on that debt service number that they have to accomplish. And if there's not enough revenue coming in, because cash flow is going to be king in the next couple of years and maybe the next 5 years. I don't know. Who knows how long a downturn is going to last, but you better be prepared for 4 to 5 more years. You know, as we record this at the end of 2024, I mean, it's not a prediction, but they seem to last a while.
Yeah.
For various reasons. And so I think if we can make sure that we don't get, you know, that we just got to figure out a cash flow, I guess is what I'm saying, because a negative cash flow is what burns up that working cap.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously, if your expenses are greater than your revenue, then you just start borrowing against assets, which obviously most farming operations are pretty asset heavy, real estate and capital improvements.
Yeah, and that I think is a fallacy sometimes too, where people look at their balance sheet and they've got a really low debt to asset ratio, but their cash flow sucks. Well, that means that at some point they're going to have to reallocate that debt and shore up and bring some liquidity back into the business. And you're talking about 8% interest. Now all of a sudden we're going backwards pretty fast. So I think we got to navigate that. And you know, you asked the question a couple of times, you know, what do you do about that? I mean, one of the things that we see some operations doing is figuring out how to bring additional revenue into the farm. You know, diversification is kind of a bad word sometimes, but on the same token, you know, the operations that we see, besides the ones that are really good marketers and really good producers, are the ones that have other revenue streams coming into the business via a spouse or another family member. You know,
I've been telling my audiences, and I'm going to tell your audience when I'm speaking to your audience in Florida, January 23rd, that agriculture in our lifetime went from production agriculture in America, from diversification to specialization, and now to survive when you look at diversification again. Diversification, when you and I were born, meant you milked cows, you had a grain farm, you on your rough acres, you had some beef cows, calves, and you maybe had a feed yard, you had a chicken barn. And if you were really diversified, you also had a wife that was either a nurse or a teacher, which I always make the crack that farmers, the per capita farmers married to nurses and teachers, great. You get insurance and you get diversified revenue.
Right.
But diversification, I don't expect these farmers that I'm going to talk to at your audience are going to go and build a little hen house or put a watermelon stand into their driveway. Diversification in modern agriculture for revenue purposes might be you have a trucking company, you own storage units, you own a retail business in town. I mean, because you've got to insulate yourself. And I really think that we're going to go back to, it's a different type of diversification from the specialization that got us to where we are now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you got to look for those that are synergistic to your business. You know, what are the core competencies that your staff has? I mean, we do a lot of long-term strategic business development planning where we'll look at that and we'll say, okay, we're short on revenue, but we have this, you know, the staff that's in your shop, just use an example for one that we're working with now, it has this phenomenal ability to do repairs and maintenance. And now all of a sudden, you know, your fleet is newer, needs less of that stuff, but there are operations in the area that you could bring 2 or 3 combines through your shop at lower than what the equipment dealer can do it at.
Yep.
Be a good deal for the neighbor. And all of a sudden they've got a repair and maintenance facility now. They're employing their staff and they got those things going on. We got another one that has lawn care business. We have another one, you know, so they synergistic with your core competencies in your team? Because I think sometimes what people will do is they're like, well, we're just going to not have help anymore, you know, or whatever. And I'm a firm believer of if you find somebody that has passion and loves what they do and they want to be there, you hire them because you will find something for them to do. And that's where that diversification comes in. All of a sudden there are ways, whether it's like you said, the trucks or whatever, there's all kinds of different things that we see people getting pretty creative on. And those are the ones that, you know, their balance sheet, that they're earning equity every single year, even on these downturns.
I've got your strategies: capital freeze for 1 year, debt service, understand all your numbers. And you also even broke that out as what's a short-term loan, like a operating, what's a intermediate, what's a long-term, like land loan, machinery management on the expense side. We agreed that there's probably still more machinery per unit of output than there needs to be on a lot of farms. And that's somewhere that they could really ratchet things down. Landlord relationships and having conversations about cash rent, inventory management of grain. When we say managing your working capital, it really means you better make sure managing working capital should be retermed. Make sure you're cash flowing positively, because if you're not, if your expenses are greater than your revenue, you're going to just continue to eat into held assets and borrow against it until your assets are leveraged to the hilt. Diversification of revenue. Next one.
So another one that I think super.
If you're listening to this, by the way, Chris sounds like pretty good, but if you're watching it, he just kind of looks over. He almost looks like he's been tired. And I want you to watch this because I'm on YouTube, and you really need to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm also on Acres TV, and I want to grow my following on YouTube. So please subscribe there. Just go to YouTube and type in Damian Mason channel. But
maybe it's
pure look, guy.
You say I look tired. I don't feel tired. But.
Well, I don't know, man. You're just kind of like, Maybe you talk about numbers too much, I suppose.
Yeah, well, could be. But I guess, you know, the other one thing, though, that I think is really key that we haven't mentioned yet, and I was kind of holding off on it, is the lender relationship. And the lender relationship is directly correlated to how you communicate, how often you communicate, and what you communicate. So it's the data that you have, and it's having a conversation from the lender and asking the lender, what is it that you need to see? In other words, instead of you going to the lender with the stuff you think they're going to need, which, by the way, when you get into a downturn, the scrutiny goes up and the requirements of how much you have to bring and what you need to bring increases. But it's having that conversation well in advance and saying, what is it that you need? And then you do the work, not the lender. It's not the lender's job to do your cash flow It's not your lender's job to do your trends analysis, all that kind of stuff. You should be doing those trends analysis and those things yourself. If you don't know how to do it, your lender's doing it. Talk to your lender and start learning from the lender. The lender wants you to be educated, and the lender will help you. Be careful with lender advice, with all due respect to lenders, because, I think you have to be the executive of your business. The lender isn't. The lender's just loaning you money. But you need to make sure that the data that you provide is accurate and that you communicate often too. And that, when I talked about the capital freeze, if you're going to buy something in these sorts of environments, make sure you have a conversation with the lender, regardless of what it is. It's good just to pick up the phone and talk to them and have that relationship. And then the last thing with that, the people that we see that have the data in place, it doesn't matter what their debt to asset ratio looks like, unless it was horrible, but almost everybody we work with has pretty solid balance sheet. But if you look at that, the ones that have really good information, really good data to their lenders, on average are running about 3/4 to a point lower in interest rates because they're a better loan. They're a class A loan instead of a C or even a B. So they can, and people think, well, I can't negotiate interest rates. Yes, you can. You absolutely can.
And a key to doing that is, as you said, a key to doing that is communicating with the lender and saying, here's my numbers, here's how things look, and being very forthright about what the numbers are and the position and being professional. And then all of a sudden, like you said, you're 0.75 lower on interest rates than the guy down the road, and over $1 million, that's big money.
It's huge money. And then compound that over multiple years. You're buying a farm that the neighbor can't buy. So, it's just pretty common sense. A lot of this stuff is just common sense, but a lot of it's discipline too. A lot of it's, it's not as much fun to sit down at the desk and do a strategic plan. It's not as much fun to sit down and do a spreadsheet as, as some of the other things we can do. But those are the $500,000 an hour tasks that need to be done.
Yeah. All right. I got 8 things. Is that the list of strategies for that smart farms use to weather bad ag economies?
I think that's all of them. I had a bunch of stuff jotted down, and I think that's the majority of them.
How many farming operations do you work and consult with? 3 dozen, 2 dozen?
More than that. We have a lot of operations that we've worked with over the years that we sort of graduate and then they come back if other things are going on. So over the years, I know for a fact we've worked with over 1,000 operations, but we have 4 of us that are working with operations now, and we each work with about 25 each. So about 100. About 100
right now.
At a given time.
And you've obviously got a breadth of experience. You've been doing this for a long time, and you farm yourself, and you have your, AgView solutions. And so you've got a lot of things going on. So we call this the business of agriculture. And I started this 8 years ago, and I said, this is not going to be bumpkin talk. This is going to be intelligent, business-minded stuff. So even if the person listening to this is not a farmer, there's a very good chance they're an ag professional and they are still tied to the family operation in Illinois, whatever. So I want you to give a couple of thoughts here. When the 1,000 operations you've worked with in your career, the 100 you work with right now, give me a couple of golden threads that run between the successful ones. Is it, I know we talked about these strategies right here. Is it a mindset? Is there a management? I'll give you mine. One thing that I think is always very powerful when I look at successful farming operations, they don't let the kids come back into it like the day they walk through the commencement at their high school. They make them go away for a while and make some mistakes, but also learn and see and then bring them back. I'll give you another one. They treat it like a business. They absolutely don't just treat it as, oh yeah, well, granddad and all that's great. Legacy is cool, but they run the farming operation business. So I'd say management of the kids coming back into the operation, number 1, meaning you don't let them just do it without having gone away. Number 2, they absolutely look at it as a business all the time. And number 3, I think that what I like about the successful farming operations I see is a worldview versus what's the neighbor doing? What's the neighbor? I swear, we know that this happens. You and I have been around these ag people. If you're focused on the neighbor, if you just you wake up worrying that they're driving to the field, oh God, they're in the field and I'm not. If it's all about judging the neighbor and chasing the neighbor and competing with the neighbor, you're screwed. The farming operations manage the kid coming back to the operation. Number 2, always treat it as a business. Number 3, worldview versus neighbor gossip view.
Mm-hmm. I gave you a couple more. Those are all excellent. A couple more that we see that are threads, to your point, that really lend themselves to very successful operations are operations that that are families farming together that can differentiate the governance of family versus business. So they have governance. So when they get together for Thanksgiving, they aren't talking about the farm because they do that in a professional environment, and they separate the two. And so then the family legacy has an opportunity to go on because they're not bitching at each other at Thanksgiving about something that they should have talked about that was an issue 4 months earlier. So separation of that's one. The next one is clear.
Excellent, by the way. Excellent, considering we're recording this at the holiday time, and a lot of people listening to this just came through the holiday time, and there was awkward moments. Again, there's farm, there's professional, and there's personal. And if you're in a farming family operation, learn to separate the two. Love it.
Yeah. And we've been talking about financial this whole time. The majority of what I'm doing anymore is legacy planning and, and transition and collaboration. But the next one is communication. They have crystal clear roles and responsibilities identified for everybody that's on the team. They have clearly defined expectations and clearly defined decision rights. So again, it's a communication dynamic that sets themselves up for the business to be successful, because you can get all the math right, you can have all the money in the world, and people screw it up over and over again if you don't structure things correctly for the team health and for the team management. So that's one. Two other ones, having a clear vision. So that carries on with the communication, but what is this business going to look like in 10 years? And having everybody pulling the rope to that target. You don't go out to a gun range and shoot just in the air. You have a target and you shoot for a specific place on that target too. So it even gets more granular than that. And so that's that one. And then the last one is clean data. The data they have is accurate. It's not fudged. It's not, and the only thing I would say there, the only caveat there is sometimes those operations that have really clear and clean data have information overload. So you got to be real careful. There's a balance there between information overload and having really clean data. So it's like asking, what is it that you need to know? Spend the time getting that information, because if it doesn't correlate to a return to the business, why are you building the spreadsheet? I'm guilty of that myself. Sometimes I'll sit down and I'll build something out and I'm like, okay, how's this going to make me more money? So you got to be real careful because there's a balance there. But those are kind of the four things that we see that sort of correlate to very successful operations.
I love them all. Data, I get it, but that becomes that would be my least favorite thing to break into there, because that's sort of the accountant-minded person. Vision, love that. A successful farming operation. We talk about weathering the bad economies to have a legacy, to be here to occupy tomorrow. Mm-hmm. What does that look like? Well, yeah, I'm just going to do it. I mean, it's not just I'm going to milk the cows again tomorrow. No, what's a year now look like? What's 5 years from now look like? I love that one. Communication, roles, expectation, and the decision makers. I came from a farming operation that absolutely had none of those things, so I can clearly appreciate that. And then obviously the separation of farm and family. That's fantastic. So your four are better than my three, but you said my three were okay.
Yeah, they were excellent. And I think it's a combination of all the above. I think, you go back and listen to this. I bet that's what I would recommend to people. You go back and listen to your three and these four. If you do three out of the 7 things next year, you'll be successful. And then you just keep chipping away at that stuff, because we can't fix everything at once either. So you kind of got to pick what area, is going to, give us the most return for our time, for our investment, because time is one of those things too that a lot of people don't measure. And last time I checked, they're not making any more of that. You can make more money, but you can't make more time. And I think that's the other thing too, is people that are successful know how to manage their time really well.
And as you said, view time. You said it 3 times already. Are you applying your time for a $30 return because you love going out and driving a tractor, or because you're avoiding the office where your hour is worth $1,000 of managing the things we've just talked about? So I like that. His name's Chris Barron. The company's called AgView Solutions. He's got a podcast called AgView Pitch. I've been a guest on it. It's great. It's good stuff. He talks a lot about numbers. He's a consultant to successful farming operations. He also has an executive conference I'll be speaking at on January 23rd. Down in Florida at the Hollywood Beach, Margaritaville and Hollywood.
Margaritaville and Hollywood, Florida. Yep.
Yeah, I've been there before. It's going to be a good time. Anyway, so much. Thanks so much for being here. By the way, my new show, The Granary, in conjunction with the guys at Extreme Ag, is out. If you like my show, The Business of Agriculture, you're going to like. If you like listening to guys like me and Chris talk, you really should check out The Granary. It's a show that is shot from my granary, my on-farm hangout, the 1800s era building that I converted to my man room with a table sitting there. It might be some adult beverages being served in the background, and we talk about real issues impacting agriculture. It's real talk. It's authentic. You can find it on the Extreme Ag YouTube channel, or you can find it at extremeag.farm. That's extremeag.farm without an E on the front of it. So check it out. It's my new creation. I'm really excited about it. It's called The Granary. Eventually, maybe we'll get Chris Barron there to join us in The Granary for some of this kind of talk.
Sounds good.
I don't know if an Iowa guy can lower himself to going to Northeast Indiana. I mean, we've only got like 8 inches of top, though, not 8 feet like you.
I spend a lot of time in Indiana too, so yeah, I'll swing in, especially if the beer's cold.
It always is. All right, so next time, thanks for being here. He's Chris Barron. I'm Damian Mason. If you want to find out more about your company, they go to, where do they find you?
agviewsolutions.com.
agviewsolutions.com. So next time, thanks for being here. I'm Damian Mason, and this is The Business of Agriculture. Hey, thanks for being here. This episode of The Business of Agriculture was brought to you by Pattern Ag. You've heard me talk about Pattern Ag because I think it's a pretty cool concept. New technology that allows you to predict the problems you're going to have and therefore treat them before those problems cost you money. What kind of problems am I talking about? Pests and disease. Things like cordon rootworm, sudden death syndrome, cyst nematode, and a whole bunch of other bad things that happen out there in the field that can cost you money. Guess what? Pattern Ag will let you find out ahead of time if the disease or the pest pressure is there, and therefore you're treating it before it costs you any money. What a great concept. Go to pattern.ag, that's www.pattern.ag, to learn more about their product, their technology, how it can make you money, save you yield, and also where you can find a rep that can come out there and do the work for you. Pattern.ag.